opportunities are there for us to get together. And it's sometimes a little shame when it feels like people are always trying to pull us apart. The minute we start to step together, and I don't want to fall victim to that. I don't want to succumb to any of that in this town. And because of people like you, and I know your heart, we're going to keep pushing forward and being the Chattanooga we can be. And I believe that so much in my heart that I just appreciate what you continue to do in working with our community to bring us together, and especially with the gift of music that changes our lives. I've been in places like the Tivoli and concerts where I see every kind of people in this city. And it just, it warms my heart because I know who we are as a people. And I just totally, I agree with you, Councilwoman. I rebuke all the other items that people try to spin and try to keep us from celebrating our lives together and being together and learning from each other and building friendships. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here this afternoon, Captain.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Council.
All right, moving now into Public Works. I'm sorry. Oh, Councilwoman Hill. Sorry, I was supposed to come back to you.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I don't get my news from social media. The statement that I made about people of color and young people not feeling welcome in downtown Chattanooga is based on research that was done by River City Company, which is charged with, in many ways, animating our riverfront. So that's based in fact. And I'm certain there are other people that have other opinions, as have been stated here, and that makes perfect sense to me. I think the thing we celebrate is the awareness that the Friends of the Festival has brought to making their selections of artists throughout their history. That is what we celebrate. And when we say, let's make sure that we have a variety of music, not just an Americana fest. Personally, y'all, I'm a boring old lady. Like, I love Americana music. The Tivoli concert that was Jason Isbell is right up my alley. And you know how many people of color I saw there? I don't even think I could count 10. And that place was full. And there's nothing wrong with that place being full. I think that's fantastic. It was one of the best Jason Isbell shows I've ever seen, and I was thrilled to be there. But what I know is that I have friends that could care less about Americana music. And they live in Chattanooga too. And they may love heavy metal music. They may love rap music. They may love hip hop music. And when we think about creating a Chattanooga that everybody has a home in, I think that that's something that we need to keep in mind. And when we as a body are going to say, hey, we'll give you 18 grand worth of comped out services, that if we're going to talk about one Chattanooga, we don't need to feel bad and imply that it's disunifying or separating, to say, hey, let's make sure that this neighbor and that neighbor might feel like this is something they want to come see too. I think that's an okay conversation for us to have. We shouldn't feel icky about it. We should just have it. And it sounds to me like the Friends of the Festival folks have been having it, and that's important. So I was glad when I called Mickey that he shared that with me, that in fact they were aware of that. And that's something that they thought about, because you know what? If all it is a whole bunch of indigo girls, y'all would get real sick of it. I would be jamming out all the time. My husband would be rolling his eyes. He'd say, can we get some gypsy jazz in here? So when we talk about being together, we're also really different people, and that's okay. And we should be offering things for all different kinds of people, because otherwise we're going to have a brain drain. Nobody's going to want to live here if all we ever do is listen to Indigo Girls. And I love the Indigo Girls. So using them, they're not coming. They've been here before, and I was there. Anyway, thank you. That's all.
So, Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your light. We're not going to litigate this black-white situation at this time. This is about a fee waiver on riverfront nights. We're moving on. Thank you, Mr. McCamish.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Madam Clerk, 7G, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to execute a federal U.S. Communities Contract number 4400008468 with Safeware to assist local communities in procurement of public safety and emergency preparedness equipment and related services, and leverage this contract to install a system of automated high water road closures at flood-prone streets within the city for an amount of $256,357.19.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Being that we, oh,
Sorry, I
Chief.
was just up here because the administration would ask that we withdraw this at this time. We're still working out some cost sharing details with Hamilton County, and we're just not ready to proceed with this right now.
oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Council, it's been requested by the administration that this item be withdrawn. So at the appropriate time at our meeting at 6 o'clock, if someone would make that motion. That's item 7G. Moving now to 7H.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works to authorize on-call blanket contracts for on-call design and plan production services, contract number S2000410, for year 2 of a 5-year term with the following firms: W.K. Dixon, Volkert, Barge Design, SNME, following up RK&K, Geocentech, CTI, Croy, Chazen, La Bella Associates, Brown and Caldwell, and Arcadis, that each consultant qualified for the renewal of the 5 one-year blanket contracts for professional services, estimated at $250,000 total annually for all 11 professional firms for use by all departments.
All right. I see no lights on this item. Council, if you would turn your attention to our purchase items for this afternoon. I think we have a total of 9 for this evening. And we do have one request for an RFP. Any questions or comments on any of these items? If you got, okay, if you hit your light, please, ma'am. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the other copies of the purchases.
I'm sorry.
I need a copy of the purchase items. I only have this one form.
Oh, you don't have a copy of the purchase items?
Right.
Did you have a question or you just needed the copy? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, seeing no other lights, if you'd turn your attention now to our February the 8th agenda, our 2-week agenda. Let me know if you have any questions concerning any of those items. While you're looking, I will ask also for future considerations. Anything in our future considerations that needs to be brought before the council at this time? Councilwoman Dotley.
I had a question about on the future considerations, economic development A, and maybe I missed it, so, but I was wondering about the American Rescue Plan funds in amount of $2.9 million for eligible activities outlined in the home ARP allocation plan. I was wondering what is the allocation plan, and what is ours, or has it already been sent?
Hello, Councilwoman Dotley.
Hey, Jermaine.
Hey, so that presentation is what you all will hear today during our Economic Development Committee meeting. And so we'll have a presentation that we can present about the home ARP funds.
Thank you.
You good?
Mhm.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other lights, I would like to recognize our newly appointed Parks and Outdoors Director, Mr. Scott Martin. Scott, you got anything you'd like to say to the council at this time? Just introduce yourself and tell us any exciting plans you got for Parks and Outdoors.
My first exciting plan is to have heat for my wife at the Airbnb we're renting until our rental house is ready, if anyone has any firewood. No, really delighted to be here. Thank you all for the opportunity and look forward to spending time with each of y'all in your districts and then in the city. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, we do have two committee meetings this afternoon, Economic Development Committee, followed by Planning and Zoning. Is there anything else that needs to come before the council at this time? Councilman Ledford?
Chairman, just to note, we will have about a 20-minute presentation that may extend even longer by Camaros on the zoning assessment.
And we'll have that after we go over our agenda items?
That is correct, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And
Okay.
we were supposed to bring our laptops. I apologize, sir. We were supposed to bring our laptops today. I sent out an email, but I've been informed that Karen will run a slideshow and that we will be on a conference call.
Okay.
Thank
Very
you.
good. We do not need laptops. Okay, with no other business that needs to come before the council at this time, we will turn the chair over to Councilwoman Coonrod for our Economic Development Committee.
Thank you. Can we get approval of the minutes? All right. Jermaine, ready?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I came in a little late, so I apologize. Did we already cover the economic development items, or did we need to cover those? We covered those during the
yeah.
agenda.
We need to cover it. Do you want to do your spiel first, or you want us to cover it first?
Whatever your preference is.
Well, we'll go ahead and cover it first then. All right, go ahead.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a nonprofit lease standard form agreement with the Forgotten Child Fund, Inc., and substantially the form attached to lease approximately 516 square feet of warehouse squares at 1815 East Main Street, identified as tax map number 156BD009, for the 3-month term of February 1, 2023 through April 30, 2022, for the rent of $1 per term with the option to renew for 3 additional terms of 3 months each.
No questions? 7B.
A resolution authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a nonprofit lease standard form agreement with the Forgotten Child Fund, Inc., and substantially the form attached to lease approximately 1,142 square feet of the office space at 1715 East Main Street, identified as tax map number 156BD011, for the 3-month term of February 1, 2022 through April 30, 2022, for the rent of $1 per term, with the option to renew for 3 additional terms of 3 months each.
No questions? 7C.
A resolution to amend resolution number 30619 to authorize the mayor or his designee to enter into a donation agreement in substantially the form attached with the AIM Center, Inc., for the development of affordable housing on the property located at 1815 East Main Street, identified as tax parcel number 156BD009, and to execute all documents necessary to complete the transaction.
Questions? Thank you. All right, Jermaine.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So Jermaine Freeman, Senior Advisor to the Mayor for Economic Opportunities and Economic Development. Good afternoon. Our presentation today will be given by Sandra Gober, Manager of our Division of Housing and Community Investment. In this role, Sandra oversees all affordable housing programs in which federal dollars are allocated from HUD, including CDBG, home, and ESG funds. Sandra will be assisted by Sam Wolf, our Director of the Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, and Cassie O'Neill, Manager of the Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Today's presentation will focus on a recent allocation of federal funds called Home ARP dollars. This funding is completely separate from our regular allocation of ARP funding. This funding is primarily designed to provide housing options for unhoused populations and homeless individuals and people most at risk of becoming homeless, and primarily targeted to individuals making less than 50% of the area median income. With that, I will turn it over to Sandra, Sam, and Cassie.
Good afternoon. It's like Jermaine kind of covered a lot of everything that I was going to say, so this is going to be pretty quick. As he indicated, our division, the Division of Housing and Community Investment, we do manage the federal entitlement dollars that the city receives. And that includes the Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnership Funding, and Emergency Solutions Grant. And we also are charged with, you can go on to the next slide because I'm going to like flip through probably like the 5th slide or something, because since Jermaine did cover a lot of it. So we're charged with managing, oh, I can do that myself? Oh, sorry. Which side? This? Click that. Okay. It's been so long since I've been up here. And again, so these are the entitlement grants that the city of Chattanooga receives on an annual basis. And we receive the funding based on formula allocations. And we also manage some other state and local funds. And the purpose for, excuse me, the purpose for us being here today is really to kind of talk about a special allocation of home investment partnership funds that we received from HUD. We received annually, again, we get about 800,000 in what we're calling regular home funds from HUD. And those dollars are primarily for the preservation and production of affordable housing. And we can also utilize it for tenant-based rental assistance. This allocation, which is a special allocation through the American Rescue Plan, provided $5 billion to HUD, and HUD, using their annual formula for allocations to cities and counties like Chattanooga that typically receive the home funds, we were allocated $2.9 million based on that formula. And we were notified of this award in September. To let me kind of tell you what the eligible funding activities that we can use the money for. Again, with the regular home, it is, again, bricks and mortar and tenant-based rental assistance. This funding is primarily for activities that do provide housing along with social services. That's the big difference, is that with this funding, we can do supportive services as well as housing. And we can, with these funds, also do acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter. And the other unique requirement associated with this funding is that it has to primarily benefit what HUD calls qualifying individuals. And these are families and households with incomes that do not exceed 50% of the AMI, or area median income. Let's see. I'm fun with this. Of course, to access the funding, there are some prescribed steps that we have to do, and that principally sort of involves engaging the community in getting input, consulting with the agencies and organizations that do provide services to this population, analyzing the local needs, and developing a plan, submitting that plan, or making that plan available to the public for review and comment, gaining city council approval and acceptance of that plan, and then submitting that plan to HUD. Because these funds are primarily focusing on assisting families and households challenged with homeless issues, the Office of Housing, Homelessness and Housing Supportive Housing, they were charged with developing the plan, doing the consultations, writing the plan, and then in partnership with them, we will submit submit the plan to HUD for review. So I'm going to let Cassie O'Neill, she was really primarily, she and Sam did the consultations and did the public input meetings. So I'm going to kind of let her talk about the process that they undertook in order to get the input from the public on that.
These are the big button, Sandra. Good afternoon, Council. I'm Cassie O'Neill. I'm the manager of the Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. If that is a mouthful for you, you can say OSH. We've kind of accepted that we are OSH to most people. And I want to draw your attention to the piece of art on this slide. This was made by a local artist named John Rankin. Mr. Rankin used to create his art while living in an encampment. And he created this piece and gifted it to the Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to thank us for getting him into a home. And this is a painting of his front door. It is very special to my office, and it really motivates us to keep doing what we do. There we go. Oh, no. There we go. Perfect. I got it now. So as Sandra described, there is a consultation process required for this allocation plan. So Sam and I started back in November. We did what we called a listening tour. We made sure to engage people across the homeless services system that provides services to a diverse group of people that make up our homeless community. So you see on there, we spoke to the Coalition, which is our continuum of care anchor organization, La Paz, which assists the Latinx community with homelessness, and a couple of our behavioral health partners and mental health partners, as well as Veterans Affairs, to make sure our veterans' needs are also met through this plan. In addition to these listening sessions, I sent out a digital survey to all of our community partners, or 17 of them, and that's just in homeless services. We received 16 responses. As a result, our community partners were able to tell us that it was their priority that we utilize these funds for, number one, non-congregate shelter, and number two, increasing the stock of affordable housing in our community. After that, we moved on to doing our public sessions, where people in the community had the opportunity to learn about what this grant is for, what it could be used for, and tell us how they see us prioritizing it. On January 6th, we had a virtual meeting, and that meeting was really well attended. And the result of that meeting was a majority of people saying they would prefer we prioritize this funding for non-congregate shelter, as well as increasing the housing stock for affordable housing. On January 24th, we were able to have an in-person meeting, and we also hosted that one virtually. This one was not as well attended. It was mostly follow-up questions presented in the first session that we hosted, as well as people having a lot of questions to ensure that we're using this money the most efficiently and effectively as we can, and we're not duplicating efforts across the multiple funding pots the city has received over the last year or so. And the outcome of that meeting was still affordable housing was the number one priority. So after all the consideration and the feedback, it was incorporated or rejected in our allocation plan. We are currently in the 15-day comment period, which started on January 27th. So at this time, people can review the draft allocation plan by going to the city website and finding the link. And then you can submit your feedback to me directly by email or phone. And that brings us to the present, where we present this plan to you, Council. Our 15-day comment period will end on February 10th. I want to say that again in case people want to make sure they get their comments into me. And then on February 15th, that is when, Council, you should see the resolution to accept the funding and approve the use of that funding, as we discussed here today. And then by February 17th, we hope to submit to HUD. So the city has prioritized the following for the use of these funds based on the feedback that we received from our community and feasibility of the projects. So number one is the development and support of affordable housing. And I want to make sure we emphasize that this housing or this funding is to be used by people 0 to 50% AMI. Because it is targeting those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, majority of it will serve those who are 0 to 30% AMI, and that's area median income. And that designation of 0 to 30% by HUD is considered extremely low income, ELI, in case I slip into jargon. So additional supportive services is another priority for us that could just increase the number of service providers in our community, those existing and internally at the city. Tenant-based rental assistance is something that the city uses to house people like Mr. John Rankin and others. And of course, because this is a HUD fund, 15% of it will be used for administration. And this is lifted directly out of the allocation plan. This is the budget that you will see once you look at it. As you can see, we took the 15% off the top and then divided the remainder with between the 3 priority areas, equally of approximately $840,000 each. And of course, this budget can be adjusted as we go through the funding. There will be a continual assessment process to ensure that we are using the funds in the most efficient and most high demand way for our community. And again, I just want to review the timeline, because timelines are very important when you're utilizing HUD funding. The next time you should see this council will be February 15th. The resolution will be in front of you to accept funding and approve the usages that I've outlined in the plan. And February 17th, I would love to submit it to HUD on that day. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments about it, Sandra, Sam, and myself are here if you have any questions.
Thank you for the presentation.
Mhm.
Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Cassie,
Yes.
this funding is almost the equivalent of 4 years of typical home funding. What's going to be different in Chattanooga in the end of 12 months when this money is spent?
Sure. So, and I want to be clear, this funding is special in that it can be used over 10 years.
It can be used over 10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
so-
actually, the final allocation month is September 2030. So it is potential to create a funding system that could support people in Chattanooga for a long time.
Okay. So what's going to be different in 10 years based on this $2.9 million?
In the big scope of things, $2.9 million in Chattanooga's housing market isn't a lot. But I hope, I can't speak to the affordable housing plan unless Jermaine would like to come up and assist and explain how they plan to use that line item. Or we can create additional services. The ultimate goal is to just increase or decrease homelessness in our community.
Can we go back to the plan slide, please, with the itemized spending?
Of course.
Okay, so
Mhm.
$840,000 for development of affordable rental housing that can be spent over 10 years.
Correct.
You're right, that doesn't seem, I mean, it seems to me like what's your impact going to be in 2 years, because that money's going to go like that. That could be one project.
Well, there are parameters for accessing these funds,
Mm-hmm.
and there are caps for how much you can spend per household as well. So let me put it to you in this perspective. We utilize tenant-based rental assistance in the city's housing program. We have used approximately, doing math in my head, I'm just going to round up to about $700,000 in tenant-based rental assistance in the last 2 years to house about 112 people for over a year and pay all their utilities. And why that doesn't seem like a lot, those are just households. Individuals, we're housing, that's 200 people off our streets, and that is an impact.
And so the supportive services, then, so you've
Mhm.
basically got equal buckets of money. So my question was actually more about the actual creation, development of the affordable rental housing, $840,000 for the actual development of housing.
Okay.
As
Let me-
opposed to, and I'm just being direct, I'm not being
No,
aggressive.
no,
Please
no.
know that. this is
I
a
struggle
really
with the
important
same
topic to me.
thing, trust
Okay,
me.
a really important topic to me. And when I hear we've got the equivalent of 4 years coming in,
Mhm.
I want to know something's different in the end. And, you know, Councilman Byrd posed a fascinating question to the council months ago,
Mhm.
which was, is it possible for us to become a community where it is effectively impossible to be homeless. Not because bad things don't happen, but because we are confident enough in our community partners and the funding that they have and their ability to do their work alongside our affordable housing portfolio and our mental health and addiction services to know that we as a council can know that if someone comes to us and is speaking to us about a really difficult situation someone's living in, that every one of us up here knows this is how that can be handled.
Right.
And if you and if we've built our net right, that ultimately it becomes a choice. Either you accept services and so forth, or you've chosen a different lifestyle. So I'm pretty inspired by that question. I got into this work of public service because of homelessness and poverty. So that's why I want to know when we have a heck of a pile of money coming at us. If we've got 600 people who live homeless in Chattanooga today, in 4 years, are we still going to have 600, just different 600? Or are we going to have 250? This is what I want to get at.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Sam on this. He's itching and jumping behind me.
Okay, cool. And no, I'm on your team when I'm asking you these questions.
Good afternoon. Councilman Hill, to answer your question, I think that it's kind of a combination in the fact that we will have a whole new pool of people versus some folks that will be homeless in that time still. Again, we kind of broadly define those two different groups of our episodic homeless population. Those are folks that Cassie and her crew and homeless services serve. And then there's the chronic homeless population. For the perspective of scale for this problem, we had a needs assessment done by the Center for Supportive Housing back in the previous spring. They estimated that the total price tag for all the housing that our community would need with projections, including an influx of the homeless population, is approximately $59 million. That's to fund the housing and the supportive services for our chronic homeless population. We absolutely recognize that this funding is a drop in that bucket. That's why we need to be really strategic and layer it on top of additional funding resources that we have at the city, at the state level, looking to support projects that use the low-income housing tax credits that the state offers. And we really see that this money is the pot that's going to help people get over the finish line on a lot of those projects.
Do we have a document that helps us see exactly how much funding is in Chattanooga, in our nonprofit and our municipal sectors dedicated to homelessness alleviation and supporting our chronically homeless neighbors?
We have that for city spending, but we do not have that for the kind of larger population. But there is some numbers that the Homeless Coalition can pull for us to get a better estimate of that.
I mean, I see that. I've been rolling that around in my head, thinking about like an 18-month goal of can you pull together if we know all the funding, can we get all the players to play well together toward a single goal?
That's not an impossible figure to find, but it would only reflect the state or federal money that's been brought into the community. That's public information. As far as private donations to fight this issue, that would be a little harder to figure out. But not
Right. I mean,
impossible
I
as
think it
well.
would be a big community conversation of all of the nonprofit partners that everybody, I mean, we talk about how in Chattanooga, we've got a lot of nonprofits and we've got a gentleman that comes and talks to us regularly at Open Forum who says, I think 2 weeks ago, he was like, I think I'm going to start a nonprofit. I'm like, great. This is what we need. One more nonprofit raising money with an executive director. Like, what if there was a way for all those to work together differently? I'm opening a can of worms, I know, Chair, and I will zip my lip. But I'll let y'all finish with how is this going to help? What's the impact going to be at the end of the day with $800,000 of supportive services and rental assistance? I see will go a long way.
Yeah, I think again, it's to get a few key projects over the finish line. We haven't identified any of those projects at this point. There's still a lot of work that needs to go into kind of getting the plan published and getting it approved by HUD. But we're optimistic that in kind of some of the preliminary conversations that we had through our listening sessions with folks, that there's a lot of interest from nonprofits to use this funding to expand the services that they offer.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you good, Councilwoman? You had him on the stand. You good? All right. Okay, thank you. Councilman Lefford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman, you can take all the time you want to talk about this. I will always listen and be ready to be part of a solution. I want to share a little story because in the past years, I've asked for impact. I've asked for the collaboration and working together, and I've asked for what everyday Chattanoogan's can do to play their role, because I know and I still believe there are a lot of really awesome and incredible people here in this city that will step up and help. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a personal experience that I had last Friday. And it was a direct contact with a homeless person. And I didn't know what to do. My heart said, I need to do something. I can't not let this go. And so I called Sam and first reached out to Mr. Anderson and reached out to Sam right afterwards. Chris, thank you for answering my call. If you're in the house, there you are. And not long after, Patrick showed up, one of our new navigators, I believe, probably pretty fresh on the job. And go ahead, Cassie.
Yeah, Patrick Cade is an excellent asset to us. He started an outreach.
Yeah.
And so he was going into the camps and seeing how people are living on the street firsthand. Then he moved to housing navigation, helping people get into housing. And now he is our community engagement specialist. So if you guys want to know who to call, it will be Patrick.
Well, Patrick came down and Patrick and I worked through it together. I mean, and that's what I'm talking about. People in Chattanooga want to know how they can help. I promise you. They want to help. And I learned a lot from Patrick. And we were able to help this person. And I just want to stress how important the navigators are with firsthand contact, because I'm not trained to, I don't know if there's an addiction. I don't know if there is a mental health issue on there. I'm not trained. Now, I will take any training I can get to be better equipped. But it's really important what we're doing and in this step. And I appreciate the passion from my colleagues. I appreciate so much. And when you have it affect you firsthand, you will see a difference in knowing what we're doing. And I really appreciate that interface with Patrick. And I look forward to being a part of a solution in this city. If we could do something different, let's do it. And let's get everybody involved in a plan where everyone who wants to help can step in. And I think that's what something is needed desperately. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lefford, for those comments. Councilwoman Dottley?
I just had two clarifying questions. I just wanted to make sure that I heard everything correctly. So the $2.9 million we received is in addition to what the city is already receiving, correct?
Yes.
Am I saying that right? Okay. And secondly, can you send us the link, or at least send me the link to the public input sessions?
Excuse me?
Coming period.
I didn't hear you.
Oh, I had asked.
We can get that to you.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, thank you.
You good, Councilwoman? Councilwoman Hill, you want to answer the rest of your questions? Okay. Any other additional questions? Well, thank you so much for your presentation. My colleagues raised some great questions and concerns that we all share. And often we look at homelessness as if it's just the people that are on the streets, and we have people that are living couch to couch every day. And they're displaced and needing housing. And I would love to see Chattanooga get to 200 people that are homeless, or 0 people that are homeless. And that may be wishful thinking. I see it's been, increasing. over the years with a lot of people. When you see children that are out there, and when you live in paycheck to paycheck, it could be any one of us that could be homeless, and for a number of reasons. And so we all here are passionate about it. It looks you all got a great team to work with. I have had the opportunity of meeting Patrick. And you get my emails all the time, Cassie, about people that we run into that are displaced, and you guys have helped them secure housing. And I'll share a personal one that you all may know or have heard about it. It's a guy that we call Jabbo. He had been homeless on the streets for years. Very talented guy, speak multiple languages, play every instrument around. And for years, decades, people had been trying to, and he would have the grocery store buggy pushing it with all its items, and kind of hung out in the Avondale area. And nobody could get him housed. He didn't want to be housed for whatever reason. He said he was good living on the streets. And working with you guys' team, he finally decided to get housed, and he's a total different part, look different now, and very happy. So I really appreciate you guys for, being patient, working with him through everything that he had to work through. And not just him, that's just one success story, but it's so many others that's that way. So I really appreciate the work that you all are doing. Hopefully one day it'll be more funding put into your department, because it is a need but that's all that I have. But thank you so much. And if no one else have, well, I was going to say, Anthony Bird, when you get, that's good. Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you are finished with your committee at this time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I failed to recognize one of the masked men in the back of the room as our new Public Works Director, Tom Hutka. Tom, glad to have you on board. And if you want to come introduce yourself to the council.
Take off my glasses, take off my mask. This is getting complicated now. I'm Tom Hutka. I'm very glad to be here. I'm the city's new Public Works Administrator. I started a week and a half ago and already up to here in work, but look forward to meeting every one of you in person and working with you all. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All right, so that'll end us. I'll turn it over to zoning.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Karen comes forward. Welcome to Planning and Zoning for February 1st, 2022. If I could get a motion on the minutes, please. So moved. Without objection, the minutes will stand. Karen, there you are. I can see you through the glare, kind of. Now, Karen, I noticed Dan's not doing the presentation. Is he a little shaky still, Dan? Okay, all right. That's okay. I just thought I'd call you out back there a little bit. So are we ready, Karen? You look like you're.
We are. I do not see the clicker to move forward. Oh.
It's in her purse. Cassie has it.
I believe we're going to go through cases very quickly before the zoning code analysis presentation, and Camiros has to step off by 5:15. So I will try to wrap up in about 20 minutes. Will that be okay to give them time? They have about a 20-minute presentation.
I think we can get through that, Karen.
Okay.
We keep to our schedule and our format we've been using.
Okay, and I will, if we have, so there is a planning and zoning committee, should be a planning and zoning committee presentation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And then the ones that are pretty simple, I might just make one just briefly cover it, but not go into any of the details. The first planning item we have is on tonight's agenda under first reading. This is case 2021-213. This is lifting conditions in Waterside. And I believe there's still some continued discussion on this and might be not ready for action.
So that pot is still boiling, Karen, and I will be making a motion tonight at 6 o'clock to defer till February 22nd.
Okay. I'll move on. We have 11 cases on next week's agenda. There is a wide variety of action on these, so I will skip the overview and just move on to the first case. Case 2021-233 had substantial opposition at Planning Commission. This is the one I'll probably take a little bit more time on. And so I'll try to, this will take more time and then I'll pick up the pace after this one. This is a rezoning on Mountain Creek Road for multifamily apartments. So its request is rezoned from R1 to R3 with conditions. There's a mix of R1 with PUDs, R4 and R3 zoning in the area. The proposal is 220 units on 12.6 acres. The applicant proposed conditions at the beginning of the process, including no mass grading or clearing above the 780 topo line, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Maximum building height shall be 4 stories and maximum density shall be 14 dwelling units per acre. Just to orient you, there is a mix of uses in the area. This is about 2,100 feet to the north of North Runyon Drive to help you orient. Red Bank Elementary is southeast of the site. And because there was quite a bit of opposition, I'm going to read a couple highlights from the staff report. There is a mix of land uses in the area, including single-family residential, multifamily residential, and large tracts of vacant land. Staff noted the proposed multifamily residential use is compatible with land uses in the area. The site is positioned on one of a series of knolls at the base of Walden's Ridge and Signal Mountain. Due to topographical differences, including the existence of steep slopes, the development form on the west side of Mountain Creek Road is very different from that of the east side. Structures along the west side of Mountain Creek Road generally follow the topo contours and are located around the base or the tops of these knolls. Structures on the east side of Mountain Creek Road are more spread out across their individual sites because their terrain is more generally flat. In order to ensure compatibility with the development form of the area, the applicant proposed conditions limiting the building height to 4 stories and the maximum density of 14 dwelling units per acre. And the rear portion of the site contains slopes ranging from 26 to 45% grade. The applicant has proposed a condition of no mass grading or mass clearing above the 780 topo line. So staff found the request is compatible with adjacent land uses and development form. And in order to protect slopes and maintain compatibility with adjacent development, staff recommends supporting the applicant's proposed conditions and the rezoning. You notice I didn't mention an area plan. There's not an adopted area plan or land use plan that we reference for this area. The staff recommendation does mention the comprehensive plan. That is a countywide document that we reference when we don't have a more specific land use area plan in place. So the comprehensive plan identifies general characteristics and intensity levels which describe the potential for development. And so that development policy sets a framework, but doesn't get into the specifics that an area, that specific guidance for development and land use that an area plan would. So there was significant opposition. Planning Commission had a similar finding as staff. And just a note that at the Planning Commission meeting, the applicant mentioned the possible addition of an over 1,000-foot turn lane and a pedestrian crossing. This was not added as a condition, but Planning Commission did want to note that and added it to the resolution. So this comes with a recommendation to approve with those conditions. And just briefly, you're seeing the topo line, you'll see 780. It's kind of hard to see, I think. But the 780 is important to keep the development from creeping up Walden's Ridge. So the area in red shown there is the area that is above the 780 topo line. So that condition would limit grading or clearing in this area, although it's part of the area encompassed by the zoning. And that is all, unless there's any questions.
Oh, I believe we'll have some comments from Chairman Henderson as I see his light.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize up front. I may blow your time schedule, but if anybody needs to go get a haircut, now might be a good time to do it. Mr. Chairman, what's the name of this committee?
This is the Planning and Zoning
It
Committee.
is Planning and Zoning, but we seem to do a lot more zoning than we do planning. And I brought a set of house plans from the current project that my company's building right now. You know, if you want a final product to look like this right here, you have to turn over here to the foundation page and start with it. This is not a sexy page. We dig ditches in the dirt and pour gray concrete in it, and nobody but the building inspector cares anything about it. But if you want to have an end product like the front of this page, you've got to start with a foundation that supports the structure. The problem that I have with this request is we don't really have the foundation in place to support the product. We don't have the structure in place to support the product. You know, John Bridger, when he was here, when I first got on the council, he talked about creating great places. But in order to create great places, you have to start with a plan if you want to get to something that looks like a great place. You know, this house plan right here has a big chimney in it. It has a concentrated load. And in that concentrated load, you have a much beefier structure, a much beefier footing to support that load. Whenever you introduce a high density rezoning like this, you need structure in place to handle the concentrated load. And I think it becomes even a larger conversation when we talk about high density development. We need a support structure in place like walkability, public transportation, or if you've got to get in your vehicle to go get a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk, a 4-lane road. Those are the types of infrastructure. That's the kind of support that we need to begin talking about whenever we start to imagine or start to think about appropriate places to develop high density developments. Now, the applicant will come next week and he'll talk about other multifamily dwellings around this development. But don't get multifamily dwellings confused with high density dwellings. You can have multifamily dwellings in low density, medium density, and in high density. And in this case, we're talking about putting a high density development on a 2-lane road that you've got to get in your vehicle to go get a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread. So when Dan got on board, one of the first things I did was contact him. He graciously met me in the office upstairs. And he and I discussed the fact that we need an area plan for the Mountain Creek area. Dan, do you mind coming up just to kind of confirm what we talked about, just so this council can hear? It's my understanding from you that you felt like you could engage the community and possibly by the end of the year, have an area plan at least for the Mountain Creek area. Is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner, Councilman. I think, when we look at the area plans that have been completed by the RPA over the many years, there's big area plans. There's some that are more recent than others. And we are finishing up the East Brainerd area plan in the last couple months. And what I think looking forward, we don't have to always have these big, long area plan development processes. We can go in and do smaller plans, look at specific areas where we have zoning challenges and try to get more policy and greater public involvement in some of those smaller areas. And so that would be my goal, or our goal in the Mountain Creek area, is to go in and look at the corridor, look at the existing development patterns, have some community discussions, and see what kinds of.
So Dan, I know present with us this afternoon are some residents of the Mountain Creek area and some good contacts in order to get other people involved. Those of you that are from the Mountain Creek area, just raise your hand or stand up. Go ahead and stand up. We have Chris Dooley and Brooke Bradley King. Kirk, what's your last name? I'm sorry? Long, and then Fran Geyer. Dan, if you don't mind getting with these folks after our agenda meeting this afternoon and get their contact information, they can send out emails to hundreds of residents in the Mountain Creek area so that we can start formulating an area plan for this area. And I appreciate your willingness and cooperation on this. Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
So just to make this council aware, next week, this applicant is going to come and ask for a 1-month deferral. And I've seen this before in cases where the applicant, I have already told this applicant that I was not going to be able to support this rezoning. I've seen it before where they try to defer and throw candy at the community in order to get their development pushed through. But I think that we would be doing this community an injustice if we rezoned anything before we had our area plan in place. So I'm just going to ask the applicant if he would come bring his A game next week. Let's hear the case and then decide from here. But I'm going to ask this council either to table this, if it would be the applicant's wishes to table it until we have an area plan, or recommend denial so that we can give this a good hard look about what, because I'd hate to rezone something at this point in time if we're this close to getting an area plan to make this a great place. Karen, have you got the little map of the districts that I was asking about? That you sent me?
I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't have that loaded.
You don't?
I will
Okay.
have that for next week.
Okay, no problem. I was just going to show a little bit of the contrast between the Mountain Creek area and some of the more densely populated areas of the city. And great places may look different to all kind of people. But these people move there because it is a more rural feel. They like being out there. It is close to the city, but the roads are, I think many of these, this was some of the last property annexed by the city. And I think a lot of these roads were used by farmers to go from one field to the other. And so to place a high density development on a 2-lane road, I think is just being irresponsible. So I would ask next week that the council keep in mind, that we are going to be looking at an area plan. And these folks have shown up at this meeting today concerned about development in their community. I'm on board with them. I support them 100%. And I hope you'll support me to deny or at least table this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, sir. And in case you didn't watch the video, I had a very similar conversation with Colonel Dooley at Planning Commission, calling for the land use plan or a corridor plan. And I'm glad to see that we are moving forward with that initiative. So I've learned a thing or two about your district through you, and I echoed those sentiments at Planning Commission. So thank you very much. All right. Karen, you ready to dive in? Are we
Yes, so I'll move
ready
very
to go into
quickly
speed
now.
mode?
Case 6 is Tessie Lane. It's now a recommendation to rezone to R3MD to convert a 2-family dwelling to a triplex, supported by staff, Planning Commission, and the applicant did not have any concerns with the revised zoning. Number 14 is rezoning on Hickson Pike.
Hang on
This
one
is-
second, Karen.
Yes, I'm
Councilman Hill,
sorry.
good? Thumbs up, ready to go.
Rezoning on Hickson Pike near Fairfax Drive to C2 for an auto service building. There was opposition at Planning Commission. The Neighborhood Association just had not had a chance, or the applicant had not spoken with the Neighborhood Association. Staff and Planning Commission found that it's quite a long recommendation, that it's generally compatible with the plan with conditions in place, and the conditions are intended to enforce the recommendations of the plan and protect the transition to the residents to the south. Since then, there is an additional condition that's been proposed. New and used vehicle dealerships shall be prohibited. And I believe that Councilwoman Hill has been involved in leading that discussion.
Councilwoman Hill, you good? Good, thumbs up.
Okay, this was Case 230 was in East Brainerd. It was
Karen,
Wilcox.
can I cut this one
Yes,
short?
request
This is an
withdraw.
item to be withdrawn by
Yes.
request of the applicant, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go on to case number
Great.
9, please.
Okay, number 9 is Pinewood Drive, rezoning to R3 with townhomes at Planning Commission. The request was changed to RTZ, which is really more of a compatible townhouse zone. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. Staff and Planning Commission supported it. It comes with a recommendation to approve. Since then, Councilman Ledford's been working with the neighborhood, and there's a revised site plan and 3 additional conditions that will possibly need to be added.
Thank you, Karen. This was the perfect example of a community working with the developer and vice versa. We all got together in complete unison. There are conditions that have been applied to this that you have currently. That is part of this ordinance for next week, and I'm very pleased to see this work the way that it should. So I
Okay.
see no other lights. Let's go on to F, please.
So F is the case that council acted on to reconsider. This is a rezoning on Peckinpah Drive. This had been previously denied. I believe the current agenda does not reflect the alternate version. So I've been communicating with the Maria and the city attorney's office to get the alternate version on. That is the agreed upon version, I believe, coming out of that public process. There is a revised site plan and some revised conditions that reflect the working together between the applicant. And that was the alternate version that you saw, I believe, 2 weeks ago. So just note that that will need to be added on, but we'll get that added on.
Very good. Councilman Hester, are you good, sir?
I'm good.
Good.
That's another good example of community work we get to. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you did a great job of following through with that. Thank you for working so hard. All right, Karen, I think we're on item G.
Okay, 15 is Premier Drive, which abuts I-75 in the Brainerd area. The applicant would like to lift conditions from a 96 zoning ordinance to be able to develop multifamily apartments. There was no opposition at Planning Commission. Staff and Planning Commission found the request reasonable, and staff generally found that the conditions were no longer relevant.
Dr. Burrs?
Yeah. I don't know what this is.
Premier Drive
No, I know.
off of East Brainerd Road. This is the Ben Hageman case.
Yes, Premier. Okay, yes, we're wonderful. That and the next one were fine.
Okay, I will scoot through that one. The other one's just
Very good. I've done my
north
job.
on
Karen.
75.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Burrs.
Okay, so case number 5 is rezoning to R1 for a single-family dwelling to establish, to fix one up and to establish a new one. No opposition. It's supported by the plan, so staff and Planning Commission recommend approve.
Normally, I would ask for Councilman Byrd, but I do not have a Councilman Byrd today. So if I do not see any lights, Karen, on
Okay.
this item.
2007 is on North Holtzclaw Avenue, about a block south of Wilcox. The rezonings from R4 to UGC for retail and storage. There was no opposition at Planning Commission, and staff and Planning Commission found that rezoning to C2 with conditions could help. It supports the recommendations in the plan. However, we have had the applicant contact us and might like to revise their request. We did advise him to reach out to Councilman Byrd, and when we followed up today, they'd not been able to make contact, but there may be a change between now and next week or additional information.
So Karen, I'm understanding Councilman Byrd is not going to be at council. So how would you proceed or suggest we proceed with working through this?
We can confirm with the applicant if they want to move forward with this. There had been kind of some discussion over the past few days. And if there is a desire to do something different or revise the request, we can ask them if they can defer it, if they'd be okay with deferring it for a couple weeks.
If a new zone is requested, should we not come back through the process?
So
Would that qualify as a major modification?
my understanding is that that a based on what the applicant is proposing, it would be a similar or a less intense zone. And as long as the property has been noticed as going through the rezoning procedure, that can be done by council without starting all over.
So this would be a down zone as we refer to.
Or it would be, they're asking for a C2, that it might be a UGC or a less intense residential
okay.
zone. But it would be a similar zone or less intense. And we've already been notifying that there's activity on the site.
Sure, and we have precedents when moving to a less intense or a lesser zone, quote unquote, to a more higher intense. Okay, so that makes sense to me. I am seeing no lights on this item, so we will move on to item K.
Item K is on Old Wrinkled Road. The request is for non-medical supportive fair housing group home. There's already a similar use on site. I believe that they want to add 3 more residents, which triggers a need for rezoning. Staff and Planning Commission both found recommended approval. It was in line with the adopted plan. There was an opposition at Planning Commission subject to the condition because R4 does allow kind of a wide variety of uses to the single-family, multifamily residents and nonprofit group home use only.
Very good. Councilwoman, are you good? All right, fantastic. Well, that got us through the agenda items, Karen. So do we have Felicia working
Yes.
on
Felicia's going to
Camiros?
be calling Arista Strungus and Christopher Jeanette with Camiros, and they'll be doing the presentation, and I'll be kind of clicking along. And I want to thank IT for setting this up and kind of getting us over the hurdle and getting us organized.
Sure. And while we're getting them on the line, let me, this is emailed to everyone on council.
It is, we can email it afterwards. Everyone should have a paper copy in front of them.
Yeah, we have the paper copy, but I highly encourage you, if you're interested in zoning in the city of Chattanooga, to take a look at what has been presented. It's encouraging. It actually had me excited on many different topics of things that we've been talking about since I've been on council. And I think it's a really good step, but I'm going to let the folks at Camiros talk a little bit more about that. Joe, do you want to chime in anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that this is a starting place for our discussions around our zoning code. And this process began prior to this administration, but we found this extremely helpful in understanding some of the challenges, shortcomings, and gaps in our zoning code. And we think that this is going to be a really fantastic directional guide. And now that we have Dan on board, I think this is the right time to start considering how this council may want to begin making changes alongside the administration. So I just wanted to set some context for that.
Sure. And one of the things I wanted to note is reading through this, they really did pay attention to some of or a lot of the items that we have been discussing, not only at Planning Commission, but at council. I think even chickens are mentioned in here, Chairman. So, but we touch on ADUs. We touch on something that we have not touched on and have been afraid, I think, to go to, and that's even creating some design standards. And that's something I think is really important as to how Chattanooga looks. Are we online, Felicia? Okay. Good afternoon. How are you?
We're doing well. Can you hear us okay?
Yep. We're going to be real quiet, though, so we can hear you.
Okay. I also have a very loud voice, so hopefully that helps.
So Karen's standing here with the slideshow on page 1. Do you want to go ahead and start it?
Yeah, that'd be great. So Karen, if you can go to the next slide of how we got here, that'd be great. So just very quickly, I'm Arista Strungus from Camiros. I'm joined on this call as well with Chris Jeanette from Camiros, and we are the consultants who've been working on this evaluation. And how we got here was, a number of different steps. We evaluated the code as it was, just kind of taking a look at the text. Had a number of different discussions with staff to get their input. Did a series of stakeholder interviews with various people, everybody from plan commissioners, developers, realtors. And then the report you see is really an iterative process. We went through many kind of different versions of it as we went through it with staff to really make sure that we were understanding kind of the intricacies of the code, because a lot of times Sometimes stuff that's in there isn't the stuff that really happens on the ground, and sometimes stuff on the ground doesn't really happen in the code. So we wanted to make sure we got that nuance that's part of it. Next slide. So we looked at, when we were looking at the zoning code, we looked at it through this lens. A number of different things were part of it. We wanted to implement the adopted plans and policies as best we could within zoning. Really create a document that's more user-friendly, predictable, and consistent. Start to integrate some design standards in an objective manner, also allowing for more development by right, because we know a lot happens by conditional zoning, a lot may happen by variance. And we also wanted to make sure we were continuing to align with the Tennessee state regulations. And we've worked in a number of communities in Tennessee at this point. And so we're familiar with a number of the kind of quirks that are part of state legislation. Next slide. We have proposed a new organization. This is one of the things we think help people understand it. And what we call this is compartmentalization. So first, the introduction, Articles 1 and 2, what's the code about? What are all the definitions? How do you measure things? And then really into the heart of it, which is the zones. And you can see here, we've made some proposals regarding restructuring the zones and bringing things in. And so this was kind of where we ended up in this very early proposal that we put forward, as well as uses, which really talk about what's allowed, what's not allowed in the various zones. Next slide. Kind of moving along here, we also looked at general development standards. These are things like your accessory structures, your parking, your landscape, kind of how all that would lay out on the site outside of the principal building. And then kind of like moving through the kind of remainder of the ordinance, the administration, there at the end, talking about responsibilities, how things get approved, and then finally ending in enforcement. And we found that this structure works pretty well to have people navigate a code and really understand what's in there and kind of find what they're looking for in a much easier manner than when things are kind of grouped together in, say, one large article. Next slide. Part of our recommendation as well as we looked at this analysis, really including a lot more graphics. We know there's a lot that's kind of in the form-based code section of it for downtown, but we talk about bringing that to the code throughout, as well as moving things into tables and matrices, which are a lot of times a lot easier for people to understand when they can see it displayed in that kind of format. Next slide. Some of the organization principles that we looked at also kind of help to, both on the user side, understand what's in the ordinance, as well as for the administrator. One of these is comprehensive definitions. And the idea here is really to start to minimize interpretations, really make sure that we understand what all the terms we're using mean. Again, updating those in line with the state. We've made the recommendation that removing issues of ownership, because zoning shouldn't be speaking so much to the ownership of things, but really just the land use and the form and how it's built upon the lot. And creating one set of measurement methodology. So, you know, you're always measuring building height in the same way and you've got it sitting in one place. We also wanted to move to more internal consistency and a voice that's consistent throughout the ordinance. So it's removing non-zoning language. You'll see that in there in areas like landscape that talks about the importance of landscape. I think there's some survey results that are put in there, really moving things out of that kind of language and into zoning language. Again, making it clearer for folks to understand. As well as eliminating what we call the vestigial tails, those bits and pieces of old parts of the code that are somehow still in there, may reference something that's not there anymore, may refer to something that doesn't happen anymore. Really cleaning those up and making it so that everything's modern and up to date and reflects what's needed in the city of Chattanooga. Next slide. Again, taking a look at it, we wanted to make a recommendation for revised use structure. Making it easier for people to understand what they can do with their property, as well as what can happen next door to them. And for that, we've looked at things like a use matrix, tailoring the uses to each of the zones, eliminating the need for prohibited uses, and then looking to move towards a more modern generic use approach. And this includes things like you see this example here, retail goods establishment, rather than saying shoe store, clothing store, record store, bookstore, hardware store, cell phone store, really kind of putting those together into these larger categories. However, there is a caveat. We do know that some uses are still sensitive, and even though they may fit in one of these categories, they either need to be more restrictive in the zones they come into, they may have more standards that need to be applied to them. And so we're not recommending any elimination of calling out those uses that are sensitive or need additional care within the code itself. And then again, looking at things like consolidating all the different standards that are applied and eliminating things that are not necessarily zoning related, things such as hours of operation. And as you can see in the report that we provided, we recommended creating this table with all principal, temporary, and accessory uses. Next slide. So this is not you, so nobody panic that we've gone this far and done this. This is really just an example of what we're talking about when we say a use matrix. And it is similar to, I believe, what you see in the form-based code. You can see here, you go down the column, you can see what's permitted, you can see what's a special exception, whether by Board of Appeals or by City Council. And then if the cell is blank, it's prohibited. Next slide. So really what that helps you to do is you can kind of take a look and say, okay, I'd like to build multifamily. Where am I allowed to build multifamily? And you could go across that row and see which districts would allow it. Alternatively, I could have property in one of these districts. Here it's an example of a CN. What can I do with my property? I can then just go down the table and see exactly what's allowed. And it really provides two ways into the use structure that we found to be very user-friendly. People do like it. It creates a sense of predictability in the code. Next slide. As we kind of we made the recommendation that perhaps considering this type of use, we know that, Chattanooga is a very creative place. And that we need to kind of start to bring in maker-creator uses and mixed-use opportunities. So really looking at bringing in some new uses that may not be present in the current code. We do know that we have to deal with some social service-related uses, things like drug treatment facilities. This is something that, every community is dealing with, and we know we need to bring those in as well. And then alcohol-related uses. There's a lot of stuff in the code right now on these, and there seems to be some conflicts that go between the zoning and the alcohol code. So really the recommendation is to start to resolve those, look at if they all should be special exceptions, and then in particular, the slightly confusing, at least to us, the late night entertainment event facilities and or nightclubs. And if there are not better ways to, when you kind of look at the district structure and look at the uses, better ways to treat those. Next slide, please. Also, what we found, and I think as we've all gone through this pandemic, we've kind of seen that these uses are very useful, no pun intended there, that, a full range of temporary uses that really allow you to put some standards around them and then make sure that they really are temporary uses and they're being operated properly, can be brought into the code as well. So things like farmers markets, mobile retail vendors, mobile food vendors. These are the ones in the zoning code that would occur on private property, such as in a parking lot. And we've made the recommendation to tie them to a temporary use permit so that we can make sure that these are operating properly and don't by default become a permanent use on someone's land. Next slide, please. So we do see that Chattanooga has conditional zoning, and we are not making any recommendations to eliminate that. It can be very useful, and that's what we want to do is refocus its purpose. We think from our findings and what we've been looking at that some of the zoning structure that exists isn't necessarily responsive to some of the conditions. And so conditional zoning is being used to address some common development forms that you're seeing. There's conditions that keep getting imposed on certain uses or development types, use standards, landscape requirements. We can integrate those into the code for kind of any time they pop up. So that way we don't have to go through the CZ process. Creating a guide or checklist, kind of areas to consider when imposing CZ conditions as we kind of refocus its purpose. And then allowing for certain minor modifications, allowing council to set those thresholds so that, small changes can occur in the development after the CZ is approved. Next slide. So really what you see here is what we get into is the zone standards. Zones need to have purpose statements as one of our recommendations to really understand what the intent of each of these zones are. We kind of took a look at a number of the standards in place. There seems to be some evaluation of yard standards that's needed as you kind of dig into the code, things like corner side yards, refining transitional yards, where you do have minimum and maximum setbacks, building in some flexibility by adding a build to percentage, which is the amount of the building that would be required to be located in that setback. Clearing up how building height is measured, maybe measuring only in feet, which is something we've seen happen in a lot of different cities, and making sure that the standards throughout would allow for adaptive reuse throughout the city. So really kind of making allowances for that as well. Next slide, please. The residential zones, we really spent a lot of time here. We talked to a lot of people about this, and it's really kind of looking at two different characters that are going on, the urban neighborhoods and then those outside the inner ring urban areas. And I know staff has talked about creating urban residential zones. We think that's a good idea. It seems like R1, RT1, R2 are all working double duty. They're trying to address two different development forms that are happening in the city. And then we're trying to kind of fix that again with the urban overlay zone. So really kind of revising the residential district structure to reflect what you have and what you want and, you know, what things may change into would provide a lot of tools to the city and kind of, again, get us out of the CZ process. We heard from many people it's difficult to do urban built environments. There's a missing density issue. And so ways to really start to integrate that as we expand the types of residential zones that are present. You know, kind of looking at this, and as you saw in the report, when we talked about creating urban and those outside the urban areas, you know, certain zones seem to have popped in that may not be needed. And things like the RTZ, we know it's used as a Band-Aid with conditional zoning, so the potential to eliminate that as well. Next slide. So next we looked at the commercial zoning. We did not say this, we're not going to name names, but some of the stakeholders called them the Wild West. So essentially a lot of things just kind of happen in them and they don't really reflect the scale and intensity of commercial. They may not have enough transitions. They may not facilitate mixed use development. And so essentially kind of bridging that gap again comes up the UGC district and again tying that to conditional zoning. So we've recommended a restructuring of the commercial zones. So next slide. And so as you saw in the report, our recommendation was to really kind of using what you've got, but really putting it into a form that talks about a different scale, going from neighborhood commercial to neighborhood transition, addressing commercial corridors and regional commercial, and then creating kind of two scales of commercial mixed use development. Using kind of what we've been seeing happen with the UGC to reflect those two types of commercial mixed use districts. Also, we know there's some special commercial zones, the downtown form-based code, which we think can be simplified. And then again, reorienting the one zone into something that's a little bit more reflective of its purpose to be a residential professional district. Next slide. And so as part of this, as we mentioned earlier, the idea was for some of these more intense developments, non-residential, mixed use, multifamily, townhouse, that we include some basic design standards, including things like transparency, facade modulation, entrance designs, really not getting into the architecture, but looking at kind of what makes the good bones of a building in certain areas. And so we know that it would be tailored to each of the different districts, but we wanted to at least broach the subject in the report that we can start to integrate these into the code. Next slide. The industrial zones, most are more familiar with kind of how these operate. They are kind of purpose zones. We always recommend renaming manufacturing to industrial because industrial is a lot more than just manufacturing these days, and really restructuring it to a light industrial and a heavy industrial, and then potentially bringing in an industrial mixed use zone. This is areas in transition. You've got mixes of commercial stuff going on with some light industrial. There's some adaptive reuse of old buildings. You can see breweries popping into these areas, always a CrossFit for some reason, but light industrial still happening. And so really creating a district that keeps your industrial areas industrial, but kind of accommodates those areas that have started to transition. And then finally, the M4, we know it's a specific heavy industrial use. It's really geared towards things like quarries. And so we understand that it needs to be maintained. Either the district can be maintained or the standards can be added to those specific heavy uses that were part of that district or that zone. Next slide. Special purpose. You know, in this, when we looked at the agriculture, we thought perhaps one of the recommendations here to make it kind of easier to use is incorporating standards into the districts for buffers and keeping of livestock rather than focusing on, say, site plan or conditional zoning to control that. We really haven't made any recommendations for the flood zones or the airport zones, really understanding those are very specific to what they're regulating. And then the idea of moving the Brainerd Road overlay zone into subdivision, as it deals primarily with the public realm. And that's really not the zoning code's purview, it's subdivision's purview. And so that seems to be a bit more appropriate place for it. Next slide. Planned unit development, we know that these happen, and we thought that there's ways to take it and modernize it a little bit. That was our recommendation. So eliminating these distinctions between PUDs, creating one PUD option, eliminating the development standards, and really basing it on the district that's underneath it and the incentives that need to happen with that. Really using it as a function, as an effective mechanism for high quality development. So really making it a negotiation where the city receives, as you offer, leniency to certain zone standards, that the city receives a public benefit, say a plaza or a park or open space in return. And again, the current process is solid, and what we just recommended was some refinements to address its application. Next slide. So as we talked about the general development standards, really this is just kind of clarifying everything else that happens on a lot. So this is looking at things like, standards of general applicability. It's that common code control that says, the number of structures you can have on a lot, your environmental performance standards, bringing in exterior lighting controls that happen on private property, looking at permitted projections over or into yards, things like, can I have a balcony that projects into my rear yard? Can I have an unenclosed porch that projects into my rear yard? That's really what we're thinking, that kind of clarifying this and making it comprehensive would help people understand what they can do with their homes. Next slide. Accessory structures, we talked about uses being part of the use matrix, but the structures you can see here, we have some examples here of, say, a cold frame structure. That's what that blue diagram there is. Bringing them all into one article, controlling where they can go, how big they can be, looking at the common ones that are out there, fences, garages, outdoor dining, private stables, and including some sustainable ones, solar and wind, private solar and wind, cold frames, chickens and bees, which of these that we want to bring in and make sure we control it so that people know what they can do. And that's really the benefit of kind of bringing it into one article. Next slide. In parking, loading, and access, one of the recommendations was to update the parking ratios. And when you do kind of that global use matrix, it's really easy to start tying ratios to the uses that you're allowing within the city. Looking at maybe considering some parking maximums in areas where it'd be appropriate. Parking flexibility for when you're going into things like mixed use zones or areas where, parking is tight and we want to help preserve existing structures, so we can integrate some of that as well. Making sure we cover how parking lots and structures are designed, where those parking lots and structures can be located in relation to residential and non-residential uses. Next slide. And then finally, kind of everything else that comes out here, access, driveway design, things we have to deal with now. Where do you put pickup and drop off or delivery holding spaces? What are the permissions for electric vehicles? We also made a recommendation to include perhaps some bicycle parking, updating off-street loading, and then commercial and recreational vehicle storage, so that the parking chapter becomes very comprehensive in terms of all the different aspects of it that are in place. Next slide. We looked at the current landscape standards, and really there's a lot of good stuff that started there. And what our recommendation was to take a look at it, how it addresses all the different aspects of site design. So parking lots in particular, buffer yards that go between incompatible uses, street yards, street trees, really looking at what's in place now and really tying it to the new zone structure so that we're not unintentionally, based on how we structure the zones, creating variances. And that would be our recommendation, would be to build up what's currently within the code and start to make sure that it would address a new zone structure if you so chose to pursue that. Next slide. Administration, again, we do understand, administration in any city we work in, some of that's coming down from the state, and that's what we have, things like the vested property rights, but really clarifying it within three components, who has the responsibilities, how do I generally apply for something, and what type of approvals do we want to have in there? And you can see we've kind of outlined them, kind of working with what's already in place now. We've made some recommendations for potential additional ones that we think could help with kind of everyday administration of the ordinance. Next slide, please. And I'll go over a couple of our recommendations very quickly. We did look at zoning map amendment, and we know that there is the quirk that the site plan review kind of comes along with the zoning map amendment. And as you can see in our recommendation, we recommended uncoupling that because essentially if you are making a map amendment, you should be looking at the appropriateness of the zone for that area generally. So really anything that's allowed within that zone would be what's making finalizing your decision to approve or deny that zoning map amendment. So we know site plan review conditions come into this a lot. And again, that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. We see these conditions being piled on in certain areas. And so we would like to, if moving forward, the recommendation is to kind of grab all of those, figure out what the ones that keep coming up are, and build them into the code so that it's far more predictable. And you're not having to negotiate, you're saving time. We also recommended an administrative modification process. This is based on the existing form-based code process, really expanding it to create thresholds that would apply throughout the city that could be approved. Again, very minor, but really taking things off the plates of the different boards and commissions that are just kind of everyday things that keep coming by. We also recommended a zoning interpretation, which is where someone can come and apply for a written application. They provide a written application of a provision they would like to be interpreted and really understand, okay, this is what the ordinance says. You are telling me this is how this is interpreted. It helps you in time too to see where things may not be clear and where amendments can really help to clear up that portion of the code. And then, as I mentioned briefly, temporary use permit. As we recommended, kind of creating this menu of full temporary uses, creating a permit that would tie to those. Some places do use a zoning certificate or a zoning permit to that end as well, which is also feasible. But we did want to say that it is very easy to create a temporary use permit. Next slide. We looked at the nonconformity section as well. We addressed the variety of potential nonconformities. We do know that in Tennessee, there's a number of rules that come down regarding that. So it's really looking at how you can use nonconforming structures, uses, and lots in the future in line with the TCA, and as well as really understanding kind of how we want to control things that may be happening. We did hear a lot about interstakeholder interviews, and we mentioned it in the report. Regarding the 2-family homes and single-family zones, the 100 days without power rule, first time we've ever seen that. And so really looking at that, what struck us is that this may be requiring demolition or conversion that would work at a cross purpose with key city objectives. And that's things like looking at neighborhood character, kind of trying to fill in the missing density, and in addition, preventing blight. And so really, our recommendation was really to take a hard look at that and see if that's a rule that we, want to keep pushing forward, and if it's not been, or if there's ways that we either want to eliminate it or build some flexibilities into it. And then again, there was the special permit for 2-family and multifamily on lots of record. We believe as you looked at a new zone structure, and if you potentially consider that type of regulation may no longer be needed. Next slide, please. And then finally, a potential new permission. I know this graphic drives everybody crazy until the light bulb goes off. So I apologize in advance for making people crazy. But this is a potential new permission. This is allowing single family and 2-family to put basically an extension on an existing house that's non-conforming in terms of the side or the rear wall without having to go through the variation process. So as you can see here, a vertical elevation, somebody's house is a single-story house too far into the rear lot line, but they want to put a second story on, again, helping maintain the kind of character of the original home. Continued investment in an existing home could be a potential source of more affordability. This would allow them to pop that second story up and build that addition without having to either indent the wall or get a variation. Because, that kind of architecture that was required to indent could be very expensive, as well as kind of mess with the internal structure of the house. So this is a potential new permission for your consideration to see if this was something that we wanted to do as we're trying to address all these different forms of potential of residential development within the neighborhood. And next slide. I think that is the end. We should, hopefully we're both on the same page right now. That is the end of the presentation. We've been very much looking forward to coming before you to present this analysis and really appreciate you making time for us. I know it's been a very busy agenda today to give you this overview of what we've been looking at.
Very good. Arista, thank you for that. I think I was informed you were needing to go to another meeting at 5:15.
I can stick around for another 5 minutes, and I can leave Chris with you till 5:30. We tried to push that as far as we could for you guys.
So I'm not seeing any lights from the dais at this moment, but if you want to hang on for a moment, I can see if any questions come for Karen or Joda. I think probably the overall assessment from this is we have a lot of work to do, number one. And number two, it is manageable. It feels like this is into sections where we can tackle this. And it feels like it's already been identified, but I'm looking forward to hearing more. Joda, do you want to talk a little bit about next steps?
Yes. So as you know, we have now Dan Reuter, who's come on board, and this process has been ongoing, and we've since reviewed this, and now that council has reviewed this, we are interested in seeing what it would look like to begin to evaluate what's the council's pleasure around next steps for how we take on essentially an overhaul of our Chapter 38 zoning code. The administration has perspectives on how we might approach. I think Camiros has done a fantastic job on providing a zoning code analysis, and we'd like to continue to work with them and you on moving forward with an overhaul at the speed that you and your committee would prefer.
Joda, I agree 100%. And I think, Mr. Reuter, you've done this before, and I think numerous times. So I appreciate your leadership on this and expertise. But Joda, I have as well echo those comments. I feel like they've done a really good job. They've listened to Chattanooga, and they've listened to a lot of our concerns, and they've addressed this. Feels like some of the, even the nonconformities, they might want to put Boza out of business. But hey, that's
having served 2 years on Boza, I don't necessarily think that would be the worst thing.
But I think there's a lot of echo of public input, stakeholder input. I'm hearing it in this report, and I did have a chance to study it a little bit ahead of time. So I have been able to digest that. But so I would say at this point, given the time in the day, Chairman, I see you have a light on. Do you want to make some comments real quick before we? Yeah. Why don't you go ahead, sir?
So I think my only input at this point would be, this is such a large and comprehensive plan. Is there a way to break it up into bites so that we can digest it a little bit at a time?
I think that's absolutely possible, and I think the approach the administration was would support.
I would certainly rather see that approach.
Then we bring you a new Chapter 38 sight unseen.
Chairman, can we start with chickens and bees?
I'm all for them. That's that easy.
No, you're right on point, Chairman. And I think probably what we need to decide as a group and working with the administration and also Camiros is which sections we want to probably most problematic for us, and start to break off into that group, start working on those sections. But very well said, sir. Appreciate that.
And Chairman, I would say too, I think one of the valuable things that Camiros can bring in this process is, although we may take them in bite-sized chunks, that we have a plan for how we're getting through the overall number of changes before we start. And I think that that's important.
We need the plan. We need the timelines, because if we don't set ourselves up for that, then we're going to set ourselves for this never getting done. And it's too critical to what we need to do as a city.
That's right.
Okay, very good. I am seeing no other lights. Joda, thank you. Arista, Chris, thank you. Chris, you didn't do anything today, so you're off the hook. Thank you for your report. And I see no other lights from the dais, so I will go ahead and adjourn us until 6.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See ya.
Great job.
Yeah, I couldn't.
Well, it doesn't go off. It's just a thing.